The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as Princess Elena stood by her bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. Her fingers traced the cold glass, leaving small prints that quickly faded. In just 3 hours, everything would change forever. Elena had always known this day would come. Royal children were taught early that their hearts belonged to their kingdoms, not to themselves. But knowing something and accepting it were two very different things, especially when your heart belonged to someone who could never truly be yours. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness," came the gentle voice of Maria, her lady-in-waiting. "Prince Marcus has arrived." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had asked him to come, but now that he was here, she wondered if she had the strength to go through with this goodbye. "Tell him I'll meet him in the garden pavilion in 10 minutes. Maria nodded and quietly left. Elena looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Her long, dark hair was perfectly arranged, her blue silk dress was elegant and proper, but her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a woman about to break her own heart to save her kingdom. The walk to the garden felt like walking to her own execution. Each step on the cobblestone path echoed in her ears. The pavilion where she and Marcus had shared so many secret moments now seemed like a shrine to everything she was about to lose. Marcus was already there, standing with his back to her, looking out at the lake. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his broad shoulders. His dark hair caught the morning light, and for a moment, Elena allowed herself to remember what it felt like to run her fingers through it during their stolen moments together. "Marcus," she called softly. He turned, and their eyes met across the small space. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Marcus crossed the pavilion in 3 quick steps and pulled her into his arms. Elena melted against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar and morning air that always clung to him. "Tell me this isn't real," he whispered against her hair. "Tell me you're not really leaving tomorrow." Elena pulled back to look at his face. Marcus had always been handsome, but today there was something different about him. His usually bright green eyes were clouded with pain, and there were lines around them that hadn't been there a week ago. "You know I have to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The treaty with Astoria depends on this marriage. If I don't marry Prince Aldrich, our kingdoms will go to war. Thousands of people will die." "And what about us?" Marcus asked, his hands cupping her face. "What about what we have?" Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What we have was never meant to last forever. We both knew that. But even as she said the words, they tasted like poison in her mouth. What they had was real and pure and beautiful. Marcus wasn't just any man. He was the son of her father's closest advisor, a man she had grown up with, learned to love slowly over years of friendship that had blossomed into something deeper. Their love story had begun in childhood. Marcus was 3 years older than Elena, and when they were children, he had been the boy who pulled her braids and stole her desserts. As they grew older, he became the young man who taught her to ride faster than any princess should, who showed her secret passages in the castle, who listened to her dreams of seeing the world beyond Valdoria's borders. The shift from friendship to love had been gradual, like sunrise slowly lighting the sky. Elena couldn't pinpoint the exact moment she realized she was in love with Marcus, but she remembered the first time he kissed her. It was 2 years ago, during the harvest festival. They had slipped away from the celebrations, finding refuge in this very pavilion. The kiss had been soft and tentative, both of them afraid of crossing a line they could never uncross. But cross it they had, and in the months that followed, their love had grown into something that consumed them both. They met in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. Marcus would leave her wildflowers with notes hidden in the stems. Elena would find excuses to visit the archives where Marcus worked as a junior diplomat just to see his smile. They had talked about running away, of course. What couple in their situation hadn't dreamed of escaping to a place where their love could exist freely? But Elena was not just any woman in love. She was a princess, third in line to the throne, and her duty to her people was carved into her bones. "I keep thinking there has to be another way," Marcus said now, his thumb brushing away a tear Elena didn't realize had fallen. "Some solution we haven't thought of." Elena shook her head. "We've been through this 100 times. My father has already signed the betrothal agreement. The wedding invitations have been sent. Prince Aldrich arrives next week to escort me to Astoria. It's done, Marcus. It's all done." The finality in her voice seemed to break something in Marcus. He stepped back, running his hands through his hair in the gesture she knew meant he was trying not to lose control. "So what now?" he asked. "We just pretend the last 2 years never happened? We smile and wave as you marry another man?" "We do what we have to do," Elena said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "You'll find someone else. Someone you can actually marry, someone who can give you the life you deserve." "Don't!" Marcus's voice was sharp now. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me to find someone else. There is no one else, Elena. There never has been, and there never will be." The passion in his voice made Elena's knees weak. This was why she had to end it now, cleanly, before her resolve crumbled completely. If she let this conversation continue much longer, she might do something foolish, like beg him to take her away from all of this. "Marcus, please," she said. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "Harder?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Elena, you're asking me to watch the woman I love marry another man and pretend I'm happy about it. How exactly could this be any harder?" Elena turned away from him, unable to bear the pain in his eyes. She walked to the edge of the pavilion, gripping the railing until her knuckles went white. The lake stretched out before them, calm and beautiful, just as it had been on so many mornings when they had met here to watch the sunrise together. "Do you remember our first morning here?" she asked quietly. Marcus came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, but not quite touching. "You couldn't sleep because you were nervous about your first state dinner. I found you crying in the library at 4 in the morning." Elena smiled despite her tears. "You said I looked terrible." "I said you looked human," Marcus corrected. "It was the first time I had seen Princess Elena instead of just the princess. You told me about how scared you were of disappointing everyone, of not being good enough to represent Valdoria. And you told me that anyone who expected perfection from an 18-year-old girl was an idiot," Elena finished. "I still stand by that," Marcus said, "though I might phrase it more diplomatically now." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in the memory. That night had been a turning point for them. Elena had realized that Marcus saw her, not her title, not her position, but her. And Marcus had realized that underneath all the royal protocol and elegant gowns was a young woman who was just as scared and uncertain as anyone else. "I brought you something," Marcus said suddenly. Elena turned to look at him, and he pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. The paper was simple brown wrapping, tied with a piece of twine. It was so perfectly Marcus, nothing fancy or elaborate, but chosen with care. "Marcus, you shouldn't have—" "Just open it," he said. Elena unwrapped the package carefully, her hands shaking slightly. Inside was a small wooden box, carved with intricate designs of roses and vines. She lifted the lid and gasped softly. Nestled inside was a simple silver chain with a small pendant, a tiny silver rose with a single pearl at its center. It was beautiful in its simplicity, the kind of jewelry that could be worn without drawing attention, without announcing to the world that it was a gift from a forbidden love. It's from the first rose bush you ever planted in the palace gardens, Marcus explained quietly. Do you remember? You were 14, and you insisted on doing all the work yourself even though the gardeners kept trying to help. Elena did remember. She had been determined to prove she could accomplish something with her own hands, not just give orders for other people to follow. The rosebush had eventually grown into one of the most beautiful in the entire garden. Marcus, she began, but he held up a hand. I know you can never wear it openly, he said. But maybe sometimes, when you're in Astoria and everything feels strange and new, you can hold it and remember that someone in Valdoria loves you exactly as you are. Elena looked down at the pendant, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. This was Marcus at his most thoughtful, his most generous. Even in his own heartbreak, he was thinking of her comfort, her happiness. I can't take this, she whispered. Yes, you can, Marcus said firmly. Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. I need you to take something of me with you, he said. Because if you don't, if you leave tomorrow with nothing of ours to carry with you, then it really will be like none of this ever happened, and I can't bear that. Elena's hand shook as she lifted the necklace from the box. The silver was warm from Marcus's touch, and the pearl caught the morning light like a tear. Will you help me put it on? She asked. Marcus moved behind her, his fingers gentle as he lifted her hair and fastened the clasp at the back of her neck. The pendant settled just above her heart, hidden beneath the neckline of her dress. When his hands lingered on her shoulders, Elena leaned back against his chest, allowing herself this one moment of weakness. Elena, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, I need you to know something. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. What? I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest honor of my life, he said. Not because you're a princess, but because you're you. Because you see beauty in small things, because you care more about your people than your own happiness, because you have the courage to sacrifice everything for what's right. Elena felt her heart breaking all over again. Marcus, let me finish, he said gently. I need you to know that I don't regret any of it. Not a single stolen moment, not a single secret meeting, not a single time we risked everything just to be together. Loving you has made me a better man, and I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. Elena buried her face against his chest, sobbing now without restraint. All the composure she had tried to maintain crumbled in the face of his words. This was goodbye, real goodbye, and it was destroying them both. I love you, she whispered against his shirt. I love you so much, it feels like dying. Marcus's arms tightened around her. I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. They held each other in the pavilion as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, both knowing that this was their last embrace. Tomorrow, Elena would begin her journey to Astoria and her new life as Prince Aldrich's wife. Tomorrow, Marcus would begin the impossible task of learning to live without her. But for now, in this moment, they were still theirs. The rest of the world could wait. A distant bell chimed the hour, and Elena reluctantly pulled away from Marcus's embrace. I have to go, she said. I have final dress fittings, and then the farewell dinner tonight. Marcus nodded, though his eyes never left her face. Will I see you at the dinner? Elena shook her head. It's only for family and the Astorian delegation. But... She hesitated, then made a decision that she knew she would probably regret. Meet me at the Rose Garden tonight, after everyone has gone to bed. One last time. Marcus's eyes searched her face. Elena, are you sure? It will only make tomorrow harder. I know, she said, but I can't leave without saying goodbye properly, without... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. "The rose garden," he said. "Midnight." Elena nodded, then stood on her toes to kiss his cheek softly. "Until tonight," she whispered. She turned and walked away before she could lose her courage. Not looking back, even though every instinct screamed at her to run back into his arms. Marcus watched her go, his hand unconsciously moving to his cheek where her lips had touched his skin. As Elena disappeared through the garden gates, Marcus sank onto the pavilion bench, finally allowing himself to break down. Tomorrow, the woman he loved more than life itself would leave forever, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In her room, Elena sat at her dressing table, her fingers wrapped around the small rose pendant hidden beneath her dress. Tonight would be their real goodbye. Private, intimate, theirs. And then tomorrow, she would become someone else entirely, leaving Elena the woman behind to become Elena the diplomat, Elena the peacemaker, Elena the sacrifice. The face in the mirror looked back at her with sad, determined eyes. This was the price of being born royal, the cost of loving her people more than herself. She would pay it willingly, but that didn't mean it wouldn't destroy her in the process. Outside her window, the palace buzzed with preparations for her departure. But Elena heard none of it. All she could think about was midnight, and one last, stolen moment with the only man she would ever truly love. The farewell dinner felt like a play Elena was watching rather than participating in. She sat at the head table between her father, King Alexander, and Lord Roderick of Astoria, Prince Aldrich's uncle and representative. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone, discussions of trade agreements, wedding preparations, and the bright future that awaited both kingdoms. Elena smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, her training taking over where her heart had failed. But her mind was elsewhere, counting the minutes until midnight, until she could see Marcus one final time. "Princess Elena," Lord Roderick said, drawing her attention back to the table. "Prince Aldrich is most eager to meet you properly. He speaks of little else in his letters." "I look forward to meeting His Highness as well," Elena replied smoothly, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. Lord Roderick was a kind man with gentle eyes and silver hair, and Elena could see that he genuinely wanted this union to bring happiness to all parties involved. If only he knew that his kindness was making this dinner even more unbearable. "The prince has asked me to convey his excitement about your shared interests," Lord Roderick continued. "He was particularly pleased to learn of your love for literature and music. He plays the violin quite well, you know." Elena's father beamed with pride. "Our Elena is accomplished in both areas. She speaks 4 languages and plays the piano beautifully." "How wonderful," Lord Roderick smiled. "Prince Aldrich will be delighted. He has been hoping for a wife who could share his intellectual pursuits." Elena forced another smile, all the while thinking that Prince Aldrich sounded like a perfectly reasonable man who deserved a wife who could love him properly, not one whose heart was already given to someone else entirely. The dinner dragged on for what felt like hours. Course after course appeared and disappeared, toasts were made to the future alliance between their kingdoms, and plans were discussed for Elena's journey to Astoria. Through it all, Elena maintained her composure, but inside she felt like she was slowly drowning. Finally, blessedly, her father stood to make the closing remarks. "Tomorrow marks a new chapter not just for my daughter, but for both our kingdoms," King Alexander said, raising his glass. "May this union bring lasting peace and prosperity to our people." Everyone raised their glasses, and Elena lifted hers as well, though the wine tasted bitter on her tongue. Around the table, faces glowed with satisfaction and hope. These people genuinely believed they were witnessing the beginning of something beautiful. Elena wished she could share their optimism. When the dinner finally ended, Elena dutifully bid farewell to the guests, accepting their wishes for her happiness and safe travels. Lord Roderick kissed her hand and promised that Prince Aldrich would take excellent care of her, and Elena thanked him with grace she didn't feel. "I'm so proud of you, my dear," her father said as they walked back to their private quarters together. "You handled tonight with perfect dignity." "Thank you, father," Elena said quietly. King Alexander stopped walking and turned to face his daughter. In the dim candlelight of the corridor, Elena could see the mixture of pride and sadness in his eyes. "Elena, I want you to know that if there were any other way—" "I know, father," she interrupted gently. "You're doing what's best for our people. We both are." The king pulled his daughter into an embrace, and for a moment, Elena allowed herself to be a child again, seeking comfort in her father's arms. "I love you, my brave girl," he whispered. "I love you too," Elena replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. They parted ways at the top of the grand staircase, her father heading to his chambers and Elena to hers. But Elena had no intention of sleeping. She still had hours to wait until midnight, and she needed that time to prepare herself for what would be the hardest goodbye of her life. In her room, Maria was waiting to help her out of her formal dinner gown. The elderly woman had been Elena's lady-in-waiting since she was a child, and Elena could see the sadness in her weathered features. "Will that be all for tonight, Your Highness?" Maria asked after helping Elena into her nightgown. "Yes, thank you, Maria, and—" "Maria?" "Yes, my lady." "Thank you for everything, for all these years of taking care of me." Maria's eyes grew misty. "It has been my honor, Princess. Now try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After Maria left, Elena sat at her window, watching the moon climb higher in the sky. The palace grew quieter as the hours passed, the last of the servants finishing their duties and retiring for the night. By 11:30, the corridors were silent and dark. Elena wrapped a dark cloak around her shoulders and slipped quietly from her room. She knew every creaking floorboard, every servant's passage, every shadow in the palace. Moving like a ghost through the sleeping castle, she made her way to the rose garden. Marcus was already there when she arrived, standing among the bushes they had planted together over the years. The moonlight turned everything silver and ethereal, like a dream that was too beautiful to be real. He turned as he heard her footsteps, and even in the dim light, Elena could see the pain etched on his face. "You came," he said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Elena asked, moving toward him. "I hoped you would," Marcus replied. "But I also hoped you would be sensible and stay away." Elena stopped just arm's length away from him. "I stopped being sensible the day I fell in love with you." They looked at each other across the small space between them, neither quite ready to close the distance and make this goodbye real. The air was sweet with the scent of roses, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sang its lonely song. "I keep trying to memorize your face," Marcus said quietly. "But I'm afraid that someday I'll forget the exact shade of your eyes, or the way you wrinkle your nose when you're thinking hard about something." Elena smiled despite her tears. "I do not wrinkle my nose." "You do," Marcus said, and his own smile was heartbreaking in its sadness. "You're doing it right now." Elena laughed, a sound that was half joy and half sob. "I hate that you know me so well." "I love that I know you so well," Marcus corrected. "I love that I know you take your tea with honey instead of sugar, and that you sing when you think no one can hear you, and that you always read the last page of a book first, because you can't stand the suspense." "Marcus, don't," Elena whispered. "Don't catalog all the reasons you love me. It will only make this worse." "Then what should we talk about?" Marcus asked. "The weather? Politics?" How wonderful Prince Aldrich sounds. Elena flinched at the mention of her betrothed. Please don't. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Elena had seen 1,000 times but would never see again after tonight. I'm sorry, he said. I promised myself I wouldn't make this about my pain. This is hard enough for you without me adding to it. Elena closed the distance between them then, taking his hands in hers. Your pain matters too, she said firmly. Don't think for a moment that it doesn't. Marcus looked down at their joined hands. Sometimes I wish I had never kissed you that night at the Harvest Festival, he said quietly. If we had stayed friends, if we had never crossed that line. No, Elena said sharply. Don't you dare wish that away. Marcus, what we've had, it's been the most real thing in my entire life. Don't you dare regret it. Marcus lifted his head to meet her eyes. Even though it's ending like this? Even though we can never be together? Especially because of that, Elena said. Marcus, I've spent my whole life being told what to do, who to be, how to act. But with you, I got to just be Elena. Not Princess Elena, not the king's daughter, not a political pawn, just me. Do you have any idea how precious that is? Marcus pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. I wish I could give you more, he whispered into her hair. I wish I could give you everything you deserve. You gave me love, Elena said. Real love. Some people never have that, Marcus. We're lucky to have had it at all. They swayed together in the moonlight, neither quite dancing nor simply embracing, just holding each other as close as humanly possible. Elena could hear Marcus's heartbeat beneath her ear, strong and steady, and she tried to commit the sound to memory. I have something for you too, Elena said eventually, pulling back to look at him. Marcus shook his head. Elena, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted, reaching into the pocket of her cloak. It's not much, but... She pulled out a small leather journal, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. Marcus took it with questioning eyes. What is this? Everything, Elena said simply. Every feeling I've ever had about you, every memory of our time together, every dream I've had about what our life could have been if things were different. I've been writing in it for months, whenever the emotions got too big to hold inside. Marcus opened the journal carefully, his eyes scanning the first page. Elena watched his face change as he read her words, seeing the love and wonder and heartbreak play across his features. Elena, he breathed, this is... I can't take this. These are your private thoughts. They're thoughts about you, Elena said. They belong to you as much as they belong to me. And when I'm gone, when you start to doubt whether any of this was real, you can read them and remember that someone loved you enough to write down every precious moment. Marcus closed the journal and pressed it against his chest. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll treasure it always. They found a bench beneath Elena's favorite climbing rose, the one that bloomed year-round and filled the garden with its perfume. They sat close together, Elena's head on Marcus's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Tell me about your plans, Elena said quietly. What will you do after? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. My father has offered me a position with the diplomatic corps in Narita, he said finally. It would mean leaving Valdoria. Elena's chest tightened. She had known, logically, that Marcus would probably leave after she was gone. It would be too painful for him to stay, too hard to remain in a place filled with memories of her. But hearing him say it out loud made her departure feel even more final. Narita is beautiful, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You'll like it there. Perhaps, Marcus said. At least it will be different. New places, new people, new challenges. Maybe that will help. It will, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. You're young and talented and kind. You'll build a good life there. And you? Marcus asked. Are you ready for Astoria? Elena considered the question. Was she ready to marry a man she'd never met? Ready to leave everything she'd ever known? Ready to spend the rest of her life pretending to be happy? I don't think anyone is ever ready for something like this, she said honestly. But I'll manage. I always do. That's what scares me, Marcus said, tightening his arm around her. You're so good at managing, at doing what's expected of you, that you might forget to fight for your own happiness. Elena looked up at him. What do you mean? I mean, don't disappear completely, Elena. Don't become just Princess Elena of Astoria and forget that Elena the woman exists too. Promise me that you'll find moments of joy, even if they're small ones. Promise me you'll remember that you deserve happiness, even if it's not the happiness we dreamed of together. Elena felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Even now, even in his own heartbreak, Marcus was thinking of her well-being. I promise, she whispered. And promise me something else, Marcus continued. If Prince Aldrich is cruel to you, if he doesn't treat you with the love and respect you deserve, don't suffer in silence. Find a way to let me know. I'll come for you, Elena. Politics and treaties be damned, I'll find a way to get you out of there. Marcus! Promise me, he said fiercely. I can accept losing you to duty, to your sense of honor, to the needs of our people, but I cannot and will not accept losing you to a man who would hurt you. Elena saw the determination in his eyes and knew he meant every word. I promise, she said. But Marcus, from everything I've heard, Prince Aldrich is a good man. I don't think— Maybe not, Marcus interrupted. But promise me anyway, please. I promise, Elena repeated, and Marcus relaxed slightly. They talked through the small hours of the morning, sharing memories, making plans they both knew would never come to pass, speaking all the words they had never had the courage to say before. Elena told Marcus about her fears for their future, about her dreams of seeing the ocean from Astoria's famous cliffs. Marcus told Elena about his hopes for his career, about the book he'd always wanted to write, about the garden he planned to plant wherever he ended up. As dawn approached, they both fell quiet, knowing their time was almost over. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the roses in shades of pink and gold. I should go, Elena said reluctantly. The staff will be waking soon. Marcus nodded, but neither of them moved. They sat frozen in the moment, unwilling to break the spell that had held them through the night. Finally, Marcus stood and offered Elena his hand. She took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They walked slowly toward the garden gate, their hands clasped tightly together. At the gate, they stopped. This was truly goodbye now. In a few hours, Elena would climb into the royal carriage and begin her journey to her new life. Marcus would watch from some hidden vantage point, and then she would be gone forever. I love you, Elena said, the words coming out in a rush. I love you more than I've ever loved anything or anyone. I love you more than music, more than literature, more than my own life. I love you enough to let you go, and I love you enough to marry someone else to keep you safe. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you too, he said. I will love you until the day I die. And if there's anything beyond that, I'll love you there too. He leaned down and kissed her then, soft and gentle and heartbreaking. It was a kiss full of goodbye, full of all the tomorrows they would never share, full of a love that would have to last them both a lifetime. When they broke apart, Marcus pressed his forehead against hers. Be happy, Elena, he whispered. Not for me, not for duty, but for yourself. Promise me you'll try to find happiness in Astoria. I'll try, Elena promised. You be happy too, Marcus. Fall in love again, have children, build the life you deserve. Marcus smiled sadly. There will never be anyone else, he said. But I'll try to build a life that has meaning, that would make you proud. Elena kissed his cheek one last time, then forced herself to step away from him. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, my love. Elena walked through the gate and back toward the palace without looking back. If she looked back, she would run to him, and then all of this sacrifice would be for nothing. Behind her, she heard Marcus sink onto the bench they had shared, finally allowing himself to break down. In her room, Elena sat by the window and watched the sun rise over Valdoria for the last time. In just a few hours, the carriages would arrive to take her away from everything she had ever known and loved. But wrapped around her heart, hidden beneath her traveling dress, was a silver chain with a pearl rose pendant, and in a leather journal that would soon cross the kingdom's borders, a young diplomat would carry the written proof that once upon a time, a princess had loved him with her whole heart. The morning light grew stronger, and somewhere in the palace, Elena could hear the first stirrings of the day's activities. Soon, Maria would come to help her dress for the journey. Soon, her father would knock on her door to escort her to the courtyard. Soon, Prince Aldrich's men would arrive to take her to her destiny. But for now, Elena allowed herself to sit in the golden morning light and hold on to the memory of Marcus's last kiss, the feel of his hands in her hair, the sound of his voice saying her name like a prayer. Tomorrow, she would be Princess Elena of Astoria. But today, for just a little while longer, she was still Elena who loved Marcus, Elena who had spent the night in a rose garden saying goodbye to her heart. Elena's hands shook as Maria fastened the buttons on her traveling dress. The deep blue fabric was practical yet elegant, chosen specifically for the long journey to Astoria. Each button felt like another link in the chain that would bind her to her destiny. There now, Your Highness, Maria said gently, stepping back to survey her work. You look beautiful. Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was pale but composed, her dark hair arranged in a simple style that would withstand the rigors of travel. The silver rose pendant lay hidden beneath the high neckline of her dress, a secret warmth against her skin. Maria, Elena said quietly, there's something I need you to do for me. The older woman moved closer, concern written in the lines of her weathered face. Anything, my dear. Elena walked to her writing desk and picked up a sealed letter. After I'm gone, after the carriages have left, I need you to deliver this to Marcus. But not immediately. Wait until evening. Can you do that for me? Maria took the letter, her eyes soft with understanding. She had served the royal family for 30 years, and she was not naive about the ways of the heart. Of course, Princess. You can trust me. Thank you, Elena whispered, squeezing the woman's hand. For everything. A knock at the door interrupted them. Your Highness, came a voice from the corridor. His Majesty requests your presence in the courtyard. The Astorian escort has arrived. Elena's blood turned to ice. This was it. There would be no more delays, no more stolen moments. It was time to leave everything behind and embrace her future as Prince Aldrich's bride. Tell His Majesty I'll be down shortly, Elena called back. She took one last look around her childhood room. The bed where she had dreamed countless dreams, the bookshelf filled with stories of adventure and romance, the window seat where she had spent so many hours reading and watching the world below. This room had been her sanctuary, and she was about to leave it forever. Maria helped her with her traveling cloak, a heavy wool garment lined with fur to keep her warm during the journey north. As the cloak settled around her shoulders, Elena felt like she was putting on armor for battle. You are stronger than you know, Princess, Maria said softly. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." Elena's throat tightened at the mention of her mother, who had died when Elena was just 12. Queen Isabella had been arranged in marriage too, but she had found love with Elena's father over time. Perhaps, Elena thought desperately, history would repeat itself. "I hope so," Elena managed to say. Together, they walked through the palace corridors one final time. Servants bowed as Elena passed, their faces showing mixtures of pride and sadness. Many of them had watched her grow from a mischievous child into a graceful young woman, and now they were watching her leave to fulfill her royal duty. The great doors of the palace stood open, revealing a courtyard bustling with activity. 3 elegant carriages waited, their teams of horses stamping and snorting in the cold morning air. The Astorian coat of arms, a golden eagle with spread wings, decorated the sides of each carriage. Elena's father stood at the top of the stone steps, resplendent in his formal robes. Beside him were several members of the court, including Lord Roderick and Captain Hayes, who would accompany Elena to Astoria as her official escort. But Elena's eyes immediately sought out one figure standing slightly apart from the others. Marcus stood with the junior diplomats and court officials, dressed in his formal uniform. Even from a distance, she could see the pain in his posture, the careful way he held himself as if one wrong move might cause him to shatter completely. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and for a moment the entire world fell away. In that look, they shared everything they couldn't say aloud: their love, their heartbreak, their desperate wish that things could be different. "My dear daughter," King Alexander said, approaching Elena with open arms. "Are you ready?" Elena tore her gaze away from Marcus and smiled at her father. "As ready as I'll ever be." The king embraced her tightly, and Elena breathed in the familiar scent of his cologne, trying to memorize it. "Remember that you carry all of Valdoria's love with you," he whispered in her ear. "You are never alone, no matter how far from home you travel." "I'll remember," Elena promised. Lord Roderick stepped forward with a warm smile. "Princess Elena, may I present Sir Garrett of Astoria, Prince Aldrich's personal guard, and your escort for the journey." A tall man with kind eyes and graying hair bowed deeply. "Your Highness, it is my honor to ensure your safe passage to Astoria. Prince Aldrich has charged me with your protection and comfort during the journey." "Thank you, Sir Garrett," Elena replied graciously. "I'm grateful for your service." As the formal introductions continued, Elena found her attention drifting back to Marcus. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of professional composure. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. He was struggling just as much as she was, but he was doing it silently, without drawing attention to his pain. "Princess," Sir Garrett said, offering her his arm. "Shall we proceed?" Elena nodded, allowing him to escort her toward the first carriage. The vehicle was luxurious inside, with plush velvet seats and warm furs for the journey. Her trunks had already been loaded onto the other carriages, along with gifts from her father to Prince Aldrich and the Astorian court. But as Elena approached the carriage, she suddenly stopped. She couldn't leave like this, with so many words unspoken, with Marcus standing there like a statue among the crowd. She needed to acknowledge him, to say goodbye properly, even if she couldn't say everything she wanted to say. "One moment, please," she said to Sir Garrett. "I'd like to bid farewell to the court." Elena turned back toward the assembled group, and her father stepped forward with a proud smile. "My friends," the king announced, "please join me in wishing Princess Elena a safe journey and a happy future." The courtyard erupted in cheers and applause. Elena curtsied gracefully, then began moving through the crowd, accepting well wishes and final embraces from the people who had been part of her life since childhood. Cook pressed a small package of her favorite sweets into Elena's hands. The head gardener gave her a cutting from her beloved rosebush, carefully wrapped for the journey. Her childhood tutor presented her with a book of poetry, its pages already marked with her favorite verses. And then, inevitably, she found herself standing before Marcus. "Your Highness," he said formally, bowing low. "Marcus," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. They looked at each other for a long moment, both aware that they were being watched by dozens of eyes. Elena extended her hand in the formal gesture expected of a princess saying goodbye to a court official. Marcus took it, bowing over it with perfect propriety. But as his lips brushed her knuckles in the traditional gesture of respect, Elena felt him press something small and hard into her palm. She closed her fingers around it instinctively, not daring to look down. "May you find great happiness in your new life, Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion Elena could see in his eyes. "Thank you for your kind wishes," Elena replied, playing her part in this careful dance of propriety. "I will remember Valdoria fondly." Marcus straightened, and their hands fell apart. Elena slipped whatever he had given her into the pocket of her cloak, her heart pounding. Around them, the courtyard continued to bustle with activity, but for Elena, everything had narrowed to this moment, this final connection with the man she loved. "Princess Elena," Sir Garrett said gently, approaching with obvious reluctance to interrupt. "I'm afraid we must depart soon if we're to make our first stop by nightfall." Elena nodded, understanding that her time was up. "Of course. I'm ready." She took one last look at Marcus, memorizing his face, the way the morning light caught in his dark hair, the exact shade of green in his eyes. He looked back at her with the same intensity, as if he too was trying to burn this moment into his memory forever. Then Elena turned and walked toward the carriage, each step feeling like she was walking through quicksand. Sir Garrett helped her into the vehicle, settling her comfortably among the cushions and furs. Through the window she could see her father approaching for one final goodbye. "My darling girl," the king said, leaning into the carriage to kiss her forehead. "Write to me often. I'll want to hear about everything, your journey, your new home, your wedding." "I will, Papa," Elena promised, using the childhood name she hadn't called him in years. The king stepped back, and Sir Garrett closed the carriage door. Elena heard him give orders to the driver, heard the jingle of harnesses as the horses were readied to depart. She pressed her face to the window, looking out at the assembled crowd one last time. Marcus stood exactly where she had left him, his eyes locked on her window. Even surrounded by dozens of other people, he seemed utterly alone, as isolated in his grief as Elena felt in hers. The carriage lurched into motion, and Elena's heart clenched as they began to move away from the palace. She kept her eyes on Marcus as long as possible, watching him grow smaller and smaller in the distance. But then something extraordinary happened. As the carriage reached the palace gates, Marcus suddenly broke from the crowd and ran. Not toward the carriage. That would have been too obvious, too scandalous. Instead, he ran toward the eastern tower, the tallest point in the palace. Elena understood immediately. The eastern tower had a balcony that overlooked the main road leading away from the capital. From there, Marcus would be able to see her carriage for much longer, until it disappeared into the forest beyond the city. Elena pulled out her handkerchief and held it ready. Sure enough, as they passed beneath the eastern tower several minutes later, she looked up to see a lone figure standing on the balcony. Marcus raised his hand in a final salute, and Elena pressed her handkerchief against the window, waving it slowly back and forth. It was a goodbye that no one else would understand. Wordless, private, full of all the love they couldn't speak aloud. For a few precious seconds, they were connected across the distance, two hearts beating as one despite the growing space between them. Then the road curved, and the tower was lost behind the trees. Elena sank back against the cushions, finally allowing the tears to fall freely. In her pocket, her fingers found the small object Marcus had pressed into her hand. It was a button, a simple brass button from his military uniform. Elena recognized it immediately, because she had once mended that very uniform for him after he'd torn it climbing the garden wall to meet her in secret. The button was warm from his touch, and as Elena held it in her palm, she could almost feel his presence beside her. The journey to Astoria would take 8 days. Elena spent the first day staring out the window at the familiar countryside of Valdoria, watching the places of her childhood slip away behind her. They stopped at wayside inns each night, where Elena was treated with great courtesy but felt completely alone despite being surrounded by her escort. On the third day, they crossed the border into Astoria. The landscape was different here, more mountainous, with pine forests and rushing streams. It was beautiful in its own way, but alien to Elena's eyes, accustomed as she was to Valdoria's rolling hills and gentle rivers. On the 6th day, Elena finally opened the letter she had written to Marcus, the one Maria was to deliver. She had been too emotional to remember what she'd written, and now, with several days of travel behind her, she was curious to see what her heartbroken self had wanted to say. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will be well on my way to Astoria and my new life. I hope you will forgive me for not having the courage to give you this letter in person, but I feared that if we had to say goodbye again, I might not have the strength to leave at all. I want you to know that these past few days have been the hardest of my life, not because I regret my decision, but because leaving you feels like leaving part of my soul behind. You have been my greatest joy, my deepest love, and my most treasured friend. The thought of living without you is almost unbearable. But I also want you to know that I am grateful for every moment we shared. You taught me what real love looks like, not the pale imitation of affection that royal marriages usually provide, but the kind of love that transforms you, that makes you better than you ever thought you could be. I'm asking you for one final gift, Marcus. I'm asking you to let me go completely. Don't wait for me. Don't hope for my return. Don't waste your life mourning what we couldn't have. Build something beautiful with your life, something that would make me proud to have known you. Find someone who can love you openly, who can give you the life you deserve. Have children, Marcus. Fill a house with laughter and music and joy. Create the kind of happiness that we dreamed about but could never have together. I will carry you with me always, in the silver rose you gave me, in the memories we made, in the love that will never fade from my heart. But I will also move forward, because that is what we both must do. Know that somewhere in Astoria, a princess will love you until her dying day. All my love always, Elena. By the time Elena finished reading, her face was wet with fresh tears. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her traveling bag. She hoped Marcus would understand what she was trying to tell him, that their love was real and eternal, but that they both needed to find ways to be happy despite it. On the 8th day, Elena's carriage crested a hill and revealed the Astorian capital spread out in the valley below. The city was built of white stone that gleamed in the afternoon sun, with the famous royal castle perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and Elena felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. As they descended into the city, crowds lined the streets to welcome their new princess. Elena waved and smiled, playing her part, but her thoughts drifted back to a certain balcony in Valdoria's eastern tower, where a young man had stood watching her carriage disappear into the distance. The castle gates opened to admit them, and Elena saw a tall figure waiting in the courtyard. Prince Aldrich was handsome in a conventional way, with golden hair and blue eyes, dressed in the finest clothes. He stepped forward as Elena's carriage stopped, offering his hand to help her alight. "Your Highness," he said, his voice warm and genuinely pleased. "Welcome to Astoria. I hope your journey wasn't too arduous." "Thank you, Your Highness," Elena replied, accepting his assistance. The journey was quite comfortable. As Prince Aldrich smiled at her, Elena was struck by the kindness in his eyes. This was a good man, she realized. Not the man she loved, but a man she could perhaps learn to care for over time, as her mother had learned to love her father. "I've planned a small welcome dinner for tonight," Prince Aldrich continued. "Nothing too elaborate. I thought you might be tired from traveling." "That sounds lovely," Elena said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. As Prince Aldrich escorted her into the castle, Elena's fingers found the brass button in her pocket. She would keep it always, along with the silver rose pendant, as reminders of the love she had left behind. But she would also try to build something new here, something that honored both her duty and Marcus's final request that she find happiness. Meanwhile, back in Valdoria, Marcus sat in his study, carefully packing his belongings into traveling trunks. On his desk lay Elena's letter, read and reread until he knew every word by heart. Beside it sat the leather journal she had given him, already precious beyond measure. Tomorrow, he would leave for Nerida to begin his new position with the diplomatic corps. It would be hard, leaving the kingdom that held so many memories of Elena. But she was right. He needed to build a new life, one that didn't revolve around loving a woman he could never have. As the sun set over Valdoria, Marcus walked one last time to the eastern tower. From the balcony, he could see the road that had taken Elena away from him forever. Somewhere far to the north, she was beginning her new life with a man who would hopefully cherish her, as she deserved to be cherished. "Be happy, my love," Marcus whispered to the wind. "Be happy, and know that you are loved." Then he turned away from the road and walked back into the palace, ready to close this chapter of his life and begin writing a new one. It would be different from the story he had dreamed of, but Elena was right. It could still be beautiful in its own way. In Astoria's castle, Elena stood at her new bedroom window, looking out at the moonlight on the sea. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to meet, new customs to learn. But tonight she allowed herself to think of a rose garden in Valdoria, where a love story had bloomed and faded like the flowers themselves. She touched the silver pendant beneath her nightgown, whispered a prayer for Marcus's happiness, and then turned away from the window. Tomorrow, Princess Elena of Astoria would begin her new life. But tonight, she carried the memory of a wordless goodbye that had said everything two hearts could ever need to say. Some love stories, Elena reflected, were not meant to end in marriage and children and growing old together. Some were meant to be perfect and brief and transformative, like shooting stars that burn bright and beautiful across the sky before fading into memory. Their love had been one of those shooting stars, brief, brilliant, and eternal in its own way. And that, Elena realized, was enough. It would have to be enough, because it was all they could have, and it had been perfect.